The Gospel for Tuesday of Holy Week. It's John 13, 21 to 33 and 36 to 38. While at supper with his disciples, Jesus was troubled in spirit and declared, "I tell you most solemnly, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, wondering which he meant. The disciple Jesus loved was reclining next to Jesus. Simon Peter signed to him and said, "Ask who it is he means." So leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said, "Who is it, Lord?" "It's the one," replied Jesus, "to whom I give the piece of bread that I shall dip in the dish." He dipped the piece of bread and gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. At that instant, after Judas had taken the bread, Satan entered him. Jesus then said, "What you are going to do, do quickly." None of the others at table understood the reason he said this. Since Judas had charge of the common fund, some of them thought Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the festival," or telling him to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the piece of bread, he went out. Night had fallen. When he had gone, Jesus said, "Now has the Son of Man been glorified, and in him God has been glorified. If God has been glorified in him, God will in turn glorify him in himself, and will glorify him very soon. My little children, I shall not be with you much longer. You will look for me, and as I told the Jews, where I am going you cannot come." Simon Peter said, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I am going you cannot follow me now. You will follow me later." Peter said to him, "Why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." "Lay down your life for me," answered Jesus. "I tell you most solemnly, before the cock crows, you will have disowned me 3 times. The Gospel of the Lord. After the excitement of Palm Sunday a couple of days ago, and then yesterday's Gospel, where Jesus was being anointed by Mary with pure nard, which Jesus says was for the day of my burial, today we're with him in the upper room at the Last Supper, where the next 3 days' Gospels remain. We're told that Jesus was troubled in spirit, telling the disciples, "One of you will betray me." Although Jesus has been warning the disciples for a while now about his passion and death, it never appeared really to sink in. And Jesus talking of betrayal happening now must have been a shock to the 12, or at least to 11 of them. Peter motions to John, who is reclining next to Jesus, to ask him who he means. John is described as the disciple Jesus loved, and he leans back on Jesus' breast to ask him. This leaning back on Jesus' breast suggests such a degree of trust and comfortableness with Jesus. It sounds a bit like a place where we all hope to belong. It's like the bosom of Abraham, the expression we hear when Lazarus, the poor man in the parable who begged at the rich man's gates, dies and is taken by the angels to this place of safety and security with God. In a pandemic, we've all been living in such times of uncertainty and fear, where the normal things that hold us and make us feel secure have been taken away. But if we can be in that place in our lives, leaning on Jesus' breast, how amazing would our assurance and confidence in God be in all of it? Jesus tells John it's the one to whom he'll give the piece of dipped bread. This was a Passover meal, of course, and apparently it was common for the host of a meal to offer one of his guests a morsel as a token of love and affection. God is love. He can't act otherwise, and this is what he does to Judas. It's slightly heartbreaking how much he keeps on loving us, even when we shun him or in various ways betray him. After taking the morsel, we're told that Satan enters Judas. Satan had already put it into his mind to betray Jesus. Now, in embracing Satan's way, Judas is giving himself over to his own I know better, pride, avarice, jealousy, who knows. But certainly departing from the gentle, humble path of the obedience of Jesus, taking matters into his own hands. Certainly in my life, when I get into feelings of I'm right here or I know better, feeling indignant in my pride and wanting things done my way, I can recognize, sometimes anyway, afterwards that this is me straying from the humble path of obedience to Jesus, which is all too easy to do. Jesus says to Judas, what you are going to do quickly. We see that Jesus is in charge of the situation and lets Judas know that he is not going to stop him. Jesus knows that his hour has come, the reason he came into the world, and the battle with the devil is starting in earnest. The game is on, if you like. Night had fallen. These three words send a bit of a shiver down the spine, suggesting the thick darkness surrounding that night. After Judas had gone, Jesus says an extraordinary thing. Now has the Son of Man been glorified. It's as if his mission is already accomplished, like something he has been longing for has already happened. And Jesus talks about how closely his Father and he are undertaking this work together, glorifying each other in the process. He's not doing it on his own. And Jesus says all this at the time when he knows that he's about to be reduced to the utmost brokenness and shame, abandonment and death. So a word like glorified seems out of place. But it's because, as he has told them before, on the third day I'll rise again. By the amazing work that he's about to accomplish on the cross, Jesus is freeing us all from the power of sin and death to enjoy a right relationship with our God, this tender-hearted, loving God. Even though he knows that the disciples will abandon him, Jesus calls them my little children. It's such a tender phrase, and we remember how affectionately Jesus talked about children, holding them up as a model of how we should be. I think this is the only time Jesus called his disciples my little children, but it's a reminder of this is the way that he loves us all, which is humbling and fantastic. He is about to give them the new commandment to love one another just as I have loved you. He then says, I shall not be with you much longer. Peter says he wants to follow him and declares that he is ready to die for Jesus. This prompts Jesus to warn Peter that he really is not ready to do that and will shortly deny that he ever knew him. But none of this deters Jesus in his resolve to rescue us by the cross. Even Jesus' warning to Peter has a kind of graceful, poetic ring to it, with the morning crowing of the cock being called upon to signal his 3 denials. In finishing this little reflection, I think of how on such a night as this was for Jesus, when the powers of darkness appear to be getting the upper hand, Jesus' tenderness and love is so strong. When I've got something on my mind or something I don't want to do, I'm more likely to be distracted and distant, and irritable with people. But fortunately, God's ways are not our ways, and Jesus is showing us that. And the suffering in our lives can sometimes feel so pointless and unnecessary, but Jesus shows us that his way is one of service to others, and this service can be costly. If we want to follow Jesus, this is what we should expect, but in the sure knowledge of his deep love for us and the promise of his joy and new life. The suffering of Good Friday gives rise to the joy of Easter Day, and as the hope-filled quote from St. Augustine goes, we are an Easter people, and Alleluia is our song.